It's time to go ahead and put Copilot to work for us. So the one thing you'll notice is a lot of times you forget that certain things you can actually offload to Copilot as long as you know what you're doing. One of those things is boilerplate, and it's always good to double check if you're uncertain, but starting a new project can often mean going back to the docs to just remind yourself of that thing that you do once every 2 years and you sort of remember. Copilot can sometimes take care of that for you. What do I mean? Well, let's pop over Visual Studio Code and I'll open a new file. And just to play around, let's call this a bash script. So shell script is fine. That way, Copilot will know what language we're talking about, and we'll get some syntax highlighting as well. So what I like to do is just in a comment, tell Copilot what it is I'm trying to do. So guess what, Copilot? I wish to start a Python 3 virtual environment. I sort of guessed. Then I wish to install Django and Django REST framework. That's right. Okay, let's go ahead and see what happens. So let's do Python 3-m venv. Yep, that's how you start a virtual environment, and that's how you activate the virtual environment. I'm just tabbing through. That's the installation I was talking about before. And that's how you start a project. Great. So I'm going to call this expense calculator. So we'll start this project. And first we want to create a directory. So let's do a mkdir expense calculator. That's correct. Okay, so as you can tell, a lot of tabbing forward in the coming days of software development, but always double check. Of course, I'm not going to just enter this into my terminal without knowing what I'm doing. So let's also start an app. So a cd into expense calculator, and then I'm going to start an app called expenses and run server. Now, I have to admit, that's one of those moments, folks, where it gets a little bit spooky. How would it know that I wanted to start an app called Expenses? I mean, I know why it would assume that, but still, that's a little much, Copilot friend. I think the only thing missing here is a dot, perhaps. So let's go ahead and I'm going to open a terminal. And interesting stuff. I think I should rearrange that. That's one of these things where you do have to kind of have a look sometimes. And okay, thank you, Copilot. I know. Now I have to remove that CD statement from here. So that looks good. And I can go ahead and paste that into my terminal. Always double check before pasting anything into your terminal. So, and here I am at expense calculator, and that should start and activate a virtual environment using Python 3, which takes a few seconds, and it's activated. You see it on the left, bottom left of the screen, venv clear. And then I'm going to go ahead and install my requirements and go ahead and start a project as well as an app. Great. List what's here, and it's all here. Clear my terminal and run server. Now, let's go ahead and open it. And yes, my friends, that is a beginning of a Django project. So let's give our script a little name of start a Django. Okay, so now that we have started our project, let's go ahead and see how Copilot can help us code this project along. So we'll open the folder this project is in, which is expense calculator. And I'm going to go to expenses models.py, which is where I define my models, then turn into database tables. So let's see how Copilot may help me code this. Let's go ahead and close the navigation tree, and I'll start by saying class expense. And okay, so it's giving me a suggestion of having a few fields. The first one is name, which is a char field, a character field with a max length of 100. Then it actually knows to use decimal field, which is pretty impressive. I know a few seasoned Django developers that would use a float here. Really impressive for the amount and the date. Now, if I wanted to look at alternatives, I can go to next and see a few others. Here it adds Django class meta. I can go to previous. I can open Copilot and see right now 10 options. I can close this because the original offer was not so bad. Now, if something disappears on you, you can sort of hit backspace or go back up or down a line. It'll usually show up at this stage. Let's tab through, and that is actually not bad. The one thing I would say is I want it to be maybe like a date time field. It offered a timestamp, so let's do that, timestamp, and wonderful. Auto add now will give me the time the model is created. It's a good idea to actually look at some of these suggestions and see if you're learning things. We shouldn't sort of guess this is all good. We should always, I can't stress enough, know what it is Copilot has given us. We should always sort of try to understand the code to the best of our abilities. No code should go into, use without the developer knowing what is meant. That's not what I believe Copilot is intended for. So let's go ahead and open a terminal. And before we do that, I want to go on to the admin panel so I can see that this sort of works. And I'm going to do something funny that I like to do. From .models, import expense. And it sort of came up with something here. Here's an example of something that doesn't really make sense. I don't think expense category is in expenses. So here, Copilot made a small mistake. And let's see what it does here. Admin site register expense, not bad. And wow, interesting. Model admin. Very nice, Copilot. What can I say? I configured the admin panel for it. Now, is that correct? I think so. We'll have to check it and debug it now. And I'll go ahead and crack open the terminal to check everything at this point. So open a new terminal, clear my terminal, and let's do a source fenv bin activate clear. And that gives me the right virtual environment. And let's do python manage.py make migrations. No changes detected. I'm going to head over to expense calculator's setting. And there's something I want to do, which is to install the apps expenses. Interesting. So I'll do expenses dot apps dot expenses config. I just want to double check, so I'll copy this and global search it. I was correct. So now this should work. And python manage.py make migrations. What's wrong? Remember what I told you about not just trusting things blindly? That's where it comes in handy. Copilot kind of guessed what I was doing for me. How would it know what the fields are for expense? It has no way of knowing. So I could enter them manually, which is one way of doing things. And let's say I'm super lazy here. Then I'll copy my fields. And I will say, just in a temporary note, these are the expense model fields. And I'll do this. Let's see if it can better predict the admin panel. Boom. It's important to have fun with this and clear my terminal. Do Python manage.py make migrations. So it actually wants to create a category for the expense as a foreign key. And I actually think that is not a great idea, Copilot. So I'm going to say category choices field, and I'm going to tell Copilot category choices. Let's say food is an expense category I wanted, as well as transport, as well as entertainment, as well as other. And now we have to rewrite category. Now that looks about right, and clear my terminal, make the migrations, Python manage.py, migrate, clear my terminal again, Python manage.py, create super user, and let's call the user admin, and let's say admin at example.com. Now, I actually entered a not so strong password because we are here, but I'll do something a little bit stronger next time because it's always a good idea to set a good example. And now, clear my terminal, Python manage.py, run server. Great. Let's head over to my admin in a browser. So we'll full screen this, /admin, and admin. Here we are. And you'll see my expense models. And the name of the expense is pizza, of course. And the amount of the expense is, why not say $5, $5.12. And it's a food expense. It worked. It's pretty impressive that we've done so much by writing such few lines of code. Let's say I wanted this to say expense admin instead of Django admin. Now, I know how to do this. The question is, does Copilot know how to do this? So I'm going to say admin site header equals expense calculator. Poof, and that's done. Not bad at all. But this is a modern world where we want to write APIs. So in the next video, we'll create an API for our expense calculator. So we have our models, we have our admin panel. Let's create an API for our expenses calculator app. Let's create a new file called serializers.py. Let's close the navigation tree and go ahead and save this. And let's see what Copilot knows about serializers in Django REST framework. So from REST framework, that's right, Copilot, import serializers. And the class is expense serializer. Nice. I'll tab through. Now, here is where it gets tricky because it makes a few assumptions, but it's not 100% contextually aware. Now, first of all, actually, I think there's no reason why we shouldn't use a model serializer for that. So this is where I choose something different than what Copilot offered. So let's do a model serializer. And I want to go ahead and give it a little more info about what I'm doing. And actually, I do this thing sometimes where I just dump a bunch of code there and then remove it. So I'll say that the expense model is this. And it's kind of a funny way of going about things. You're making it more contextually aware. I'm sure that this kind of thing is going to work its way into the design of Copilot, but this is a kind of a workaround that works for me. So I'll say, model class, and I'll let it do its thing. So now it's telling me the right thing. And right beneath there, it gave me all the fields. And now expense needs to be imported, right? So right here from .models import expense, which is great. Copilot also takes on some of the things that IDE tools used to do for us or sometimes do for us. So let's delete this since it's no longer necessary. Let's write a little descriptive docstring serializer for expense model exposes model fields. Yeah, that's okay. Good. Now let's head over to our views. So Command P is a quick file jump, and from REST framework, import let's do view sets. Import model view sets. That's right. And I'll go ahead and define a class expense view set. Now, importing goes a long way when working with a tool like this. So first of all, I don't need this shortcut anymore. And I'll say from .serializer. That's right. So seems just about right for now. This is where we head over to the docs just to be sure. So let's open a new tab, go REST framework and API guide, view sets, model view set, and serializer class. It was right, but I want to do an allow any. So let's see the permissions. Appoint permissions and allow any. So actually a good idea would be to just do this at the settings level. So now all that's left really is URLs, which would be saying something like add API URL. And actually, let's do a little routing. So from create a router for expenses. And from expenses import views. That should work. From REST framework. Yep, that would be right. And now, router, that's correct. That's also correct. This is where I should be seeing expense view set. That was my mistake, actually. And then I have expense view set, which is great. The route is registered. Lovely. And now let's add API URL. Nice. And just include, which comes from, I think, here, but Copilot has confirmed. And settings.py. Now I want to do a REST framework with allow any permission. Okay, so REST framework default permission classes. That is absolutely correct. Great. Now to the moment of truth. Does my API work? Let's find out. Let's open our browser to /API. And it tells me that API doesn't exist, which is, it's telling me that template does not exist. Okay, so here's one of those things where you may have to go back and check out what is missing. So you have to configure the Browseable API. Let's go ahead and see if it can actually do that for me as well. So configure REST framework browsable API. There it is, API auth. So I'm going to go ahead and accept this solution. And now this has become redundant. So I'll go ahead and delete this. Remove this to clean things up. Head over here. Template does not exist. HTML. I know what I forgot. I need to configure REST framework in my installed apps. There it is. And now we should be doing much better. So there is my login screen, but I don't need it because there's no need for authentication in this app. And I see my expenses API. It works. Now let's try to add an expense via my API. So the name of this expense would be a orange juice. Why not? And the amount is cost me $110 and it's food. Why not? And there it is. It posted. If I go back to my expenses and refresh, oh, there they are, one by one. Now, if I go to the first one, how did I do? Good. If I go to the second one, how did I do? Good. Now, friends, as fun as it is testing these expenses one by one and posting, there is something that I could do. It's not always so much fun to do, but Copilot takes a lot of the effort out of, which is writing automated testing. I think it's time to try to do that in the next video. We've written our API, but code that's not tested is broken by design. That's been said by Jacob Kaplan-Moss, a famous contributor and one of the earlier founders of the Django project. Let's write some tests. It's not always fun to write tests, but Copilot, like I said before, takes a bit of the effort out of it. So let's go to tests.py. And I'm going to go ahead and say this. Imports for Django REST framework tests. Great. That looks good. And class expense test case. And I'm going to do something a little bit different. I'll start by making an import from .models import expense. Thank you, Copilot. So after a while, you sort of forget this. So when I set up, I want to do an expense.object.create. And let's go ahead and give it some context. Remember, this is kind of a workaround. Now you'll see that it has a much easier time predicting what I want to do. So the reason this is kind of giving me a hard time here is because of the quotes within quotes. This should sort of fix things. Good. And now I have my setup. Why don't we ask it to create a few? Create 3 expenses. And let's delete this. And I think it should bulk create expense objects dot bulk create. Thank you, Copilot. 1, 2, 3. Great. Very nice. And I think we should do like a def teardown. And it's been a while since I've used this particular method of testing. I strongly recommend using PyTest. It's a little bit beyond the scope of this course. So let's test the expense list. And interesting. Let's see what else we have in store. Expense detail. Okay. Interesting. And it even knows, yup, correct. Not bad. Not bad at all. Test create. Okay. So it's doing a little post and then it's checking that it's been posted. Very, very nice. I'm impressed. And let's do like a test delete. So yeah, that looks like an update. And it's asserting. Finally, there's test delete. And so we have CRUD. Looks okay. So it wanted to check that I deleted one and not all of them. Testing the length here might not yield the right result because I added one before. One way to find out, and this is not a high risk situation. Let's stop the local server, clear the terminal and say python manage.py test. Okay, so assert equals, it got a 404 for this test right here. I wonder why. Let's find out. Okay, great. So this is the kind of thing where you can kind of get into tabbing and not really look at what you're doing. If you'll remember, my API is /API. And now I can kind of make my life a bit easier here by doing a find and replace. I'll just do a API and then expenses. And I'm feeling lucky, so I'll replace all. Good. Now that should fix it. And I'll go ahead and close this, clear my terminal. Great. And now I have another issue. Assertion equals status. Let's find out. Is it the same one? It's not found. Interesting. So what would be going on here? Let's see if this is a correct URL if I just go ahead and run my server. So this works here. Am I getting something wrong with my test client? Did I configure it correctly? Let's see. Great, so now it works. The amount is not equal. So this is where refining comes in. So as you can see, it wants me to wrap these amounts in strings, I believe. Just one more, otherwise we can do like a global search here. Great. Does not exist. So where does that happen? We are hitting some issues in the query. Django does not work like this. Yeah, you can't do a get. I'm assuming that this is happening. Let's see, if I comment this out, I should probably not hit this error. It doesn't have that expense because it deleted the first expense. So that isn't a valid test. Yeah, why would it be able to query the first one and the name would be transport if it deleted the other one? So let's go ahead and fix this. So self assert. Okay, good. I think this would be a better way to test a delete. And then Let's find out that we're not deleting something else. Okay, cool. And great. Now I want to do a GET request and test 200. Great. So these tests did pass. Now, are they perfect? No. But some tests are better than no tests. We could go on and on, but this just gave you a taste of how much you can get done using Django and Copilot.